Besamaab, well-weld, Wemefeskadus, Ahadu Amalak. Besamaab, well-weld, Wemefeskadus, Ahadu Amalak. Besamaab, well-weld, Wemefeskadus, Ahadu Amalak. Amen. Melcham Adil. Melcham Adil means good morning in Amharic. I'm slowly learning Amharic. By no means fluent, but a few kind of little phrases and words. So Melcham Adil. And yeah, on with this journey, which I am really enjoying. And thanks for those of you that are, liking the videos, as in liking, well, liking whether you like them or not physically on social media, but also thanks for the engagement. So thanks for those of you that are pressing like, and any comments and DMs and conversations about it. Really, really enjoying this journey. I find it very edifying to be spending this time each morning doing this. So God willing, long may it continue. So on with the reading from the Ethiopian Bible, Genesis chapter 18. And we're in the middle of the story of Abraham and Sarah. God's just changed their names officially to Abraham and Sarah from Abram and Sarai, which I admitted yesterday I wasn't really pronouncing it in those ways. And the promise of the birth of Isaac to the very aging Abraham and Sarah. I think Abraham's 100 years old, and Sarah might be, I think she's 90 years old. It's the promise of the birth. And yesterday Abraham laughed because he was so old and being promised a child by God. So on we go. And Yahweh appears to him amongst the oaks of Mamre, and he is sitting at the opening of the tent about the heat of the day. And he lifts up his eyes and looks, and behold, 3 men standing by him. And he sees and runs to meet them from the opening of the tent, and bows himself towards the earth. And he says, My Lord, if now I have found grace in your eyes, please do not pass on from your servant. Please let a little water be accepted, and wash your feet, and recline under the tree. And I bring a piece of bread, and support your heart. Afterwards pass on. And therefore you have passed over your servant. And they say, So may you do as you have spoken. And Abraham hurried towards the tent to Sarah, and says, Hurry, 3 measures of flour meal, knead and make cakes. And Abraham ran to the herd, and takes a son of the herd, tender and good, and gives it to the young man. And he hurries to prepare it. And he takes butter and milk, and the son of the herd which he has prepared, and sets before them. And he is standing by them under the tree, and they eat. And they say to him, Where is Sarah your wife? And he says, Behold, in the tent. And he says, Returning, I return to you about the time of life. And behold, to Sarah your wife a son. And Sarah's listening at the opening of the tent, which is behind him. So Abraham and Sarah are aged, entering into days. The way of woman has ceased to be Sarah. And Sarah laughs in her heart, saying, After I have waxed old, have I had pleasure? My Lord is also old. And Yahweh says to Abraham, Why is this Sarah has laughed, saying, Is it really true I bear and I am aged? Is anything too wonderful for Yahweh? At the appointed time that I return to you, about the time of life, and Sarah has a son. And Sarah denies, saying, I did not laugh, for she has been afraid. And he says, No, but you did laugh. And the men rise from there, and the look on the face of Sodom, and Abraham is going with them to send them away. I'm going to read that bit again. And the men rise from there, and look on the face of Sodom. And Abraham is going with them to send them away. And Yahweh says, Am I concealing from Abraham that which I'm doing? And Abraham certainly becomes a great and mighty nation, and blessed in him have been all nations on earth. for I have known him, and he commands his children and his house after him, and they have kept the way of Yahweh to do righteousness and judgment, that Yahweh may bring on Abraham that he has spoken concerning him. And Yahweh says, the cry of Sodom and Gomorrah, because great, and their sin, because exceedingly grievous. I go out now, I go down now, and see whether, according to its cry, which is coming to me, they have done completely, and if not, I know. And the men turn from there and go out towards Sodom, and Abraham is yet standing before Yahweh. And Yahweh draws near and says, do you also consume righteousness with wicked? Perhaps there are 50 righteous in the midst of the city. Do you also consume and not bear with the place of the sake of the 50 righteous who are in its midst? Far be it from you to do according to this thing, to put to death the righteous with the wicked. That has been. As the righteous, so the wicked. Far be it from you. Does the judge of all the earth not do justice? And Yahweh says, if I find in Sodom 50 righteous among the midst of the city, then have I borne with all the place of their sake. And Abraham answers and says, nay, behold, I have willed to speak to the Lord, and I am dust and ashes. Perhaps there are a lacking 5 or 50 righteous. Do you destroy for 5 the whole of the city? And God says, I do not destroy it. If I find there to be 45, and he had to again speak to him and says, perhaps there, but, sorry, I'll read that bit again. And he says, I do not destroy it. If I find there 45, and he adds again to speak to him and says, perhaps there are found there 40. And he says, I do not do it because of the 40. And he says, please let it not be displeasing to the Lord. I am speak. Perhaps there are found there 30. And he says, I do not do it. I find there 30. And he says, nay, behold, I have willed to speak to the Lord. Perhaps there have found there 20. And he says, I do not do it because of the 20. And he says, please let it not be displeasing to the Lord. And I speak only this time. Perhaps there found 10. And God says, I do not destroy it because of the 10. And Yahweh goes on. When he has finished speaking to Abraham, and Abraham has turned back to his place. For these few words I give thanks. Yetabarek for cure. Blessed love. See, Yetabarek for cure means blessed love. Yetabarek, blessed, for cure, love. So yeah, interesting. It's definitely in 2 halves, this chapter 18. The first half of the chapter, again, God's very intimate conversations with Abraham and Sarah. And you can't help but think God really likes Abraham and Sarah. He's kind of forgiven them. They're not a perfect couple. In one of the earlier chapters, we saw Abraham manipulating or lying to a Pharaoh, saying that Sarah was his sister, not his wife. And then Pharaoh spares Abraham's life. And then God still protects Abraham after that. We also see in the previous chapter Sarah and Abraham, or particularly Sarah, abusing Hagar, the handmaid. And God is sympathetic to Hagar, but still says to Hagar, go back to Sarah, but I will protect you. But Abraham and Sarah were complicit in that abuse of Hagar. In the previous chapter, we see Abraham laughing at God's suggestion that he's going to be given a son by Sarah. And in this chapter, again, Sarah laughs when God tells them that they are going to have a child, even though they're so old. And then Sarah laughs and then says to God, I didn't laugh. So she actually lies to God, and God said, no, you did laugh. So God is very forgiving to Abraham and Sarah. And you could say in some of the earlier chapters, God, you could say, is very kind of unforgiving to other characters. So when Noah, is seen by seen naked, he just, curses all the descendants of Canaan, for example. Very quick judgment, unforgiving. But with Abraham and Sarah, there's a very intimate relationship being built up, which is really interesting to see. And again, the promise that they are going to have this child, and for that child's name to be Isaac. So that's the first half of this chapter. And also the three men turned out to be God. At the beginning, it says that Abraham was visited by three men. Then as it goes on, it's clear that it was God, but in the personage of three, which is interesting. And it's not really explained why or how that is, but the name, three, in terms of the Trinity, etc., going forward. So yeah, interesting first half. And the second half, it gets trickier. I started to trip up on some of the language and the wording of the sentences, but the second half of the chapter being about God's judgment of Sodom, which was teased in some of the earlier chapters, and Sodom and Gomorrah, where lots of wickedness was seen to be happening. And then we see this, Abraham's called an intercessor, or intercessor. So he's like a intermediate between God and humans. So we see Abraham negotiating with God, saying, and he takes sympathy, saying, are you going to really destroy Sodom and Gomorrah? Because there's not only wicked people there, there's also righteous people there. There might be 50 righteous people, there might be 40, there might be 30. And this negotiation goes all the way down to 10. And Abraham says, well, even if there's not 50 righteous people, there might be 10 righteous people. But are you still going to perish those 10 amongst the wicked? And then God actually concedes and he says, if I find 50 people, if I find 10 people, then I will spare them. And I won't perish the righteousness amongst the wicked. So we see God being an interventionist God, and taking judgment on what he sees as wicked behavior. But we also see him sparing the life after Abraham is advocated on their behalf, to spare the life of the righteous. So yeah, interesting, and yeah, in terms of that relationship to God, and when we see destructive things happen, then we say, why God, why was this allowed to happen? There's different views on that, which I'm sure we're going to come back to again and again and again as we read the Bible. I think reading the Bible, especially in these earlier chapters, is not always comfortable. We don't want to think as God is love or forgiving, but then they say in the New Testament that's where Jesus came in to forgive sins, etc. Whereas the God of the Old Testament is can be extremely kind of I don't know what the word is, strict doesn't feel like the right word, but on the one hand very forgiving with Abraham and Sarah, and then the next bit, that judgment on Sodom and Gomorrah on behavior that he sees as wicked. So I'm not gonna say it's not always comfortable reading. I think reading some of these passages can be quite uncomfortable to really understand the nature of God. And I think these early chapters, as I said time and time and again so far, we see that negotiation and that relationship between God and humans kind of evolving and becoming established. This is just chapter 18 of Genesis, very early days of God's kingdom on earth being established. And in a way, it's boundary setting. We see Abraham, who's very brave and speaks up to God. We see him negotiating those boundaries with God. And we also see God listening to Abraham and relining some of those boundaries. So you could say it takes a very brave man to negotiate with God. But Abraham definitely was one of those individuals that did advocate for humans, did argue the case of humans, and asking for God's forgiveness and mercy, etc. And we see God and Abraham entering those negotiations. So very interesting, but I think we can see why Abraham is kind of positioned in biblical narratives to be the key patriarch, if you like, And, you know, when we talk about the Abrahamic religions, you know, Judaism, Christianity and Islam and all the other ones that kind of fall under that banner, but Abraham is the strong figurehead that descended those, where those religions are descended from. And yeah, Abraham is emerging to be a very strong individual, and who's not afraid in a way to speak truth to power as well. So I'll end it there. I think this is by my longest recording so far since doing these readings. But have a blessed day. Give thanks to anyone listening, and look forward, you know, God willing, to the reading tomorrow. Blessed love, Malcolm Ken. Have a good day, Malcolm Ken. Blessed love. Give thanks.